Incredible twist. Black CEO stuns billionaire family. Cancels 900M deal in just 5 minutes. Richard Lewis stood in front of the expansive glass windows of the Harrington's downtown office. The city skyline glimmered in the sunlight, a stark contrast to his origins from the south side of Chicago. This was at the culmination of years of relentless work, sweat, and sacrifice. He was about to face one of the most powerful families in corporate America, and yet, a familiar unease brewed in the pit of his stomach. This moment represented everything he had clawed for, and yet shadows from his past flickered at the edges of his consciousness as the Harringtons exchanged congenial nods. Their polished smiles masked generations of privilege and unearned wealth that dripped from their very essence. Richard couldn't shake the image of his mother, a single parent who had toiled day in and day out to instill the values of honor and hard work in him. She had taught him that success was not just about personal gain. It was about uplifting others. Were these deals built on the backs of those marginalized and overlooked? His heart raced and thoughts collided. Could he ignore the history of oppression that lay beneath the surface of their gleaming empire? "Your proposal is quite intriguing, Richard," Mr. Harrington said, his voice smooth as silk. "We're considering an investment in your startup." The words echoed, yet behind them loomed the dark history of the family and their legacy of exploitation, an unsettling truth that felt as heavy as a stone in Richard's chest. He had spent years fighting against the systemic barriers that stifled potential like his own, and now, facing the very source of that inequity, he felt as if he were staring into a mirror reflecting his worst fears. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Richard pushed the thought away, steadying himself. He had worked too hard to let emotions cloud his judgment. What was 900 million in funding? A chance to secure his family's future, to provide jobs for those in his community, to finally break the cycle that had entrapped so many. Yet, with each tick of the clock, his values clawed back, demanding his attention. The very foundation the Harringtons stood upon was built from the oppression of people like him, and he found himself faced with a gut-wrenching choice. The presentation was almost routine. Numbers flashed, dreams articulated. But thoughts of those he had left behind strangled him. Was he a puppet, merely dancing to their tune for the sake of ambition? He glanced around the polished boardroom, the glistening wood table, golden fixtures, and the weight of heritage that pushed relentlessly against him. A moment stretched into eternity as he felt a creeping despair. His legacy, entwined with his integrity, a truth he refused to betray. With a flicker of defiance lighting his heart, he looked at the Harringtons. His next words would shape him far beyond this moment. And just like that, Richard rose from the negotiation table, determination mixing with sorrow as he prepared to shatter their expectations. A gasp filled the air. The billionaires shared bewildered glances, unprepared for the gravity of his next move. Would he walk away from the deal, risking everything he had fought for? He could sense the eyes of history weighing down upon him, their judgment echoing in his ears. His heart hammered as he stepped toward the door, each calculated step a silent act of rebellion. Outside, the sun flooded his vision, and he took a deep breath, the air thick and charged with uncertainty. What awaited him now? He turned his phone over in his mind. The messages had begun to light up. Perhaps there were other paths to explore. Would this pivotal moment define his legacy or become a catalyst for real, lasting change? With the world at his feet, but his heart unsettled, Richard walked into an uncertain future, teetering on the edge of retribution and hope. Richard stepped out of the skyscraper's cool embrace and into the bustling rhythm of the city. The cacophony of car horns, the murmur of the crowd, and the scent of street food enveloped him, yet he felt strangely detached. Each element painted a lively backdrop to his internal chaos. He had just turned his back on a golden opportunity, a chance most only dreamed of, but what good were dreams built on the sacrifices of others? As he navigated the sidewalk, 1,000 thoughts swirled in his mind. He had made a choice, but clarity was elusive. The 900 million offer had been a beacon, illuminating paths to success and stability, yet he had chosen to extinguish that light. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a reminder that the world still functioned, albeit without him at the center. Each ping felt like a touchstone, messages from his team, friends, and family, all eager for his next steps but unaware of the storm raging within him. Richard sought refuge in a nearby coffee shop. Dark walls lined with artwork created a cocoon that dimmed the worldly noise. Sitting at a corner table, he ordered a black coffee and let the steam rise to his face. He felt the warmth against his skin, a momentary distraction from the chill of uncertainty. Were his values strong enough to withstand the pressures that sought to undermine them? His thoughts drifted back to the Harringtons. The realization of their legacy dug under his skin like a persistent itch, and he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. They were untouched by the struggles that had shaped him. Their privilege stood as a testament to generations of systemic inequalities. Why had he never pushed back harder in that room? Why had he hesitated? Richard had fought tirelessly against barriers for so long, and yet, in the face of power, he'd felt the instinct to conform rise within him. The coffee arrived, pulling him from his spiraling thoughts. He stirred the bitter liquid absent-mindedly, watching the whirlpool form and dissipate. In that swirling chaos, he saw a reflection of his own turmoil, a mixture of ambition and integrity spinning away from harmony. This wasn't merely about a failed meeting. It was about self-discovery. Richard questioned what he truly desired. Was it the allure of wealth and recognition, or was it the ability to make a genuine impact? Digging deeper, he began to map out his next steps. Perhaps finding like-minded investors could be a path to explore a coalition of individuals who understood the fight against systemic inequities. They could share not only funds but also a vision, a commitment to change, and a belief that doing good could also yield financial return. He pulled out his laptop, the familiar glow easing some of the tension manifesting in his shoulders. With renewed determination, he began drafting a plan for a conference aimed at connecting emerging leaders, those who shared his values, who understood that success wasn't a zero-sum game. The vision of community and collaboration began to unravel the tight knots of doubt forming in his mind. Time slipped by as he immersed himself in the possibilities. He could hear the vibrancy of the coffee shop around him, but it faded into an ambient hum, drowned out by the excitement bubbling inside him for the first time since leaving the boardroom. But then a different message flashed across his phone. It was from an unexpected source, a journalist from a major magazine intrigued by his choice to walk away from the Harrington deal. Richard's breath caught. This could turn the tide. His platform could amplify his voice. The article could inspire others to prioritize values over financial gain. His heart raced with anticipation. The time had come to face the public. He would not only redefine his legacy but harness his voice to spark a fundamental shift in the narrative surrounding success in corporate America. Yet with that vision came the weight of scrutiny. Was he truly prepared for the ramifications? As he composed a response, a single thought anchored itself in his mind. He was standing at the precipice of change, and the world beyond the coffee shop, filled with noise and energy, waited for him to take the leap. The next chapter of Richard's story was just beginning, but it would demand courage, clarity, and a willingness to be vulnerable. Would he rise to meet the challenge and confront what lay ahead? Each decision he made could either solidify his principles or compromise them. The moment of truth was nearing. Sitting at the cafe, coffee cooling beside him, Richard's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He stared at the blinking cursor, the digital platform a daunting terrain, the blank document filled with potential and peril. The message from the journalist loomed in his mind, the weight of its implications threatening to crush his resolve. He had left the Harrington deal in the dust, a powerful statement about his values. Yet now, faced with the prospect of public scrutiny, self-doubt crept back like an unwelcome shadow. Was he ready for the spotlight? Richard dug deep, acknowledging that this was more than a decision about a singular article. It was about crafting a narrative that could redefine success in his world. Could he inspire a conversation about ethics in business? A challenge to the status quo? He needed the intricacies of his journey, every struggle and sacrifice to translate into a compelling story. The thought of baring his soul made his stomach churn. Yet he recognized it as necessary as he typed. Snippets of his experiences surged through his mind. Moments of triumph were often laced with the bitterness of setbacks. Each battle against systemic barriers had fortified him, sharpened his focus, and now he had the chance to convey that journey to a wider audience. Richard methodically outlined his thoughts. The pressures of wealth, the weight of legacy, and the need for integrity. The phone's gentle buzz interrupted his flow. Notifications poured in, inviting attention from others, but he resisted the temptation to check. This was his moment, and distractions could threaten the clarity he sought to capture. He paused, pulling back from the screen. It was essential to remain authentic, to weave his personal narrative into the broader fabric of society's expectations and conflicts. Was he merely reacting, or was he setting a standard? Richard leaned back in his chair, a crucial decision unfolding. His mind raced, envisioning potential questions from the journalist. They would scrutinize his motives, dig into his past, seeking weaknesses to exploit. But perhaps those vulnerabilities were his greatest strength. The notion crystallized. Sharing his journey could resonate with those who felt overlooked, those caught in a cycle of doubt, complacency, or fear. He assumed the role of educator and challenger. What if his experiences could open doors for others? What if he could prompt them to take steps towards redefining their own ideals of success? With newfound determination, he returned to his laptop and began drafting not just a response but a manifesto of sorts, the principles guiding his choices, the trials he had faced, and the resolve to stand firm in the face of opposition. Every keystroke felt more like a small victory, articulating fears, embracing lessons learned, and proposing a way forward for those who might follow his lead. He envisioned the impact the article could have, not only as a personal light for him but as a beacon for those eager to challenge the existing narrative. At last, he pressed send, feeling both exhilaration and dread. It was a leap into the unknown, one that could elicit praise or backlash. Richard's heart raced as he contemplated how quickly perceptions could turn. The same sentiment that could elevate him could also raise enemies among the establishment he had just departed. As he gathered his belongings, a mantra formed in his mind, a quiet resolution to embrace whatever came next. Though fear flickered like candlelight within him, he now felt a burgeoning sense of purpose. With every word, he regained control over his narrative. Exiting the coffee shop, Richard was engulfed in the city's persistent hum, but this time the noise felt like chorus, not chaos. He was part of a larger dialogue now, spilling beyond the glossy confines of ambition into the gritty reality of his convictions. His next steps were as uncertain as ever, but the resolve to confront the challenges ahead illuminated potential paths. The question was no longer whether he could inspire change. It was how he would navigate the backlash that could arise from asserting his voice. Before he could dwell, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from the journalist, and a single word loomed large: call. Would he be ready to engage with the world, to stand firmly in his truth? The challenge had just begun. Richard stared at the message on his phone, breath lodged somewhere between his chest and throat. The journalist's inquiry shattered the momentary calm he'd crafted after hitting send. A call? Was he truly ready to engage, or would he retreat back into the shadows he had only just begun to escape? Taking a deep breath, he recalled the quiet strength amassed in the cafe. Forcing himself back into the present, he thumbed the screen to accept the call, his heart pounding like a drum in anticipation of this pivotal moment. "Hello, Richard." The journalist's voice resonated with familiarity and urgency. "I appreciate you getting back to me." "Of course," Richard replied, forcing a steadiness into his tone. The conversation flowed like a river, inquiries ricocheting off the walls of Richard's mind. Each question he faced felt like a gauntlet thrown down, challenging him to respond with authenticity. There were inquiries about his decision-making process, personal motives, and the ethical implications of his departure from Harrington. His previous discomfort shifted into a kinetic energy, a sense of control transforming his ominous anxiety into proactive engagement. I believe in making choices based on integrity, Richard articulated, the clarity of his words surprising him. Leaving Harrington was a stand for something greater than profit. It's about legacy, not just personal gain. And referencing your journey, how do you feel that connects with the broader industry? What's the message you want readers to take away? The journalist's probing felt relentless but necessary as Richard spoke. Memories surfaced, unbidden moments around the boardroom table where ethical dilemmas reared their head like dragons, ready to engulf the unsuspecting. He articulated how experience had shaped his perspective, emphasizing the importance of moral leadership. Still, a nagging fear lingered. Was he prepared to challenge an entire system steeped in tradition and resistance? Working through his thoughts, Richard discovered layers of confidence hidden beneath the surface. This was not about his past sins but a clarion call to shape a better future for both himself and those like him. As the conversation unfolded, Richard recognized he was tapping into something deeper, his own voice, molded by experiences. Each response fortified his stance, the discomfort of exposure becoming a source of power rather than weakness. A hairpin turn in his perspective unleashed potential he hadn't realized existed. He was a narrative architect, shaping the story he so desperately wanted to tell. Your voice is crucial, the journalist urged as the clock ticked on. There's a moment here to inspire seismic change. Will you take the opportunity? Richard hesitated, grappling with the decision swaying in his gut. But he felt a burgeoning certainty. Yes, he said, the word clear as crystal. I want to share my experiences to inspire a different kind of ambition. One that values ethics at every level. They wrapped up the call and Richard set down his phone, the weight of the world lifting slightly. He had planted a flag in the landscape of his professional landscape. But he knew all too well that with any significant assertion came inevitable challenge. And while he had taken one step, countless hurdles lay ahead as he walked through the thrumming city streets. Adrenaline coursed through him. He felt the electricity of connection, the imminent outlines of a larger confrontation ahead. This was only the beginning, and test after test awaited. The question now gnawed at him. Would he possess the fortitude to withstand the storm that acknowledging his truth would undoubtedly bring? Just as he contemplated this, his mentor's name flashed in a missed call alert. Richard's heart raced. The mentor who had once guided him could offer wisdom, but now might instead demand answers, a conversation he had spent years avoiding. Would this be another chance to fortify his convictions, or would it pull him back into the very shadows he wished to escape? Richard pressed the dial button, bracing himself for the conversation that could alter everything. Richard felt the familiar twinge of apprehension as the call connected. The sound of his mentor's voice brought back memories of late nights filled with debate over corporate ethics, leadership strategies, and the ever-present tension of profit versus principles. Richard wondered if he could face the man who had once been his guiding star, now seemingly a daunting authority figure waiting for explanations. Richard, I was hoping to catch up, his mentor began, the warmth in his tone contrasting starkly with Richard's internal turmoil. Yeah, I just saw your call, Richard replied, trying to inject a semblance of casualness into his voice. I'm busy these days. Busy? There was a pause, the unspoken words lingering heavily. I read your interview. I expected some buzz. But that was something else. You're venturing into uncharted waters. Richard felt exposed, the words pouring out before he could temper them with hesitation. I had to speak my truth. I want to challenge the industry to think differently. Challenge, yes, but at what cost? Your credibility, your relationships, these things matter. His mentor pressed, each phrase an implicit warning. I've spent too long hiding, Richard shot back, his pulse racing. If I don't stand for something now, I'll be complicit in the very issues I oppose. There was silence on the other end. Richard's heart sank. Had he lost his mentor's respect with his defiance? Richard, you're more than your job title. You have an obligation to pursue righteousness, but you also have a career to consider, his mentor replied, the tone softer but still resolute. This isn't just about intent. Could lead to immediate backlash. Richard leaned against a nearby railing, the city's noise fading into a background hum. I'm ready to take that risk. I can't sit back anymore. Not when I know I can do better. His mentor's voice was contemplative. So you're ready for the storm, then? I can't keep dodging difficult conversations, Richard admitted. I don't want to avoid them anymore. I will embrace whatever comes next. Good, his mentor said, though Richard sensed the weight behind that lone word. But I need you to promise me something. No matter how it unfolds, stay grounded in who you are. Don't get swept away in this crusade. You'll face resistance, and I fear you might underestimate how far some will go to protect the status quo. A challenging thought flickered through Richard's mind. Could he remain true to his convictions while engaging with an unyielding system? He realized his mentor was offering not just skepticism but protection against his own ambition turning reckless. I appreciate that, Richard replied, surprised by the surge of gratitude washing over him. But I want T-Stray. I believe in this and I have to see it through. Just know that I'm here for guidance if you need it. You might feel alone in the coming days, his mentor warned, a hint of pride laced into his voice. Thanks, I'll remember that, Richard said, feeling a small buoy of hope lifting him. They ended the call, leaving Richard standing amidst the bustling city streets, renewed determination infusing his veins. This evolution of perspective didn't simply appear from nowhere. It was a metamorphosis unfolding in real time, with emotional stakes rising exponentially. But as the ground shifted beneath him, doubts crept in. Was he truly ready to take on the industry's titans? He pictured the looming figures. He would inevitably confront individuals unwilling to let their narratives be disrupted. Richard straightened his shoulders, confronting his mounting fear with resolve. He had taken a significant step, but what lay ahead? Would he sink or swim in the current of change? Just as he began to walk again, a notification lit up his phone. It was a message from the journalist asking for follow-up comments on a rapidly evolving situation connected to his remarks. Richard hesitated, excitement and anxiety wobbling within him. The storm was coming, but this time, it felt like an invitation rather than a curse. Holding his breath, Richard tapped the message, the screen illuminating a new battle line he had to navigate. What snapshot of his resolve would emerge from the next onslaught awaiting him? Richard stared at the screen, the headline glaring back at him like a challenge. The journalist's request buzzed in his mind, a reminder of his recent confrontation with the industry that had for so long dictated his worth. He had a choice, to articulate his stance and risk backlash, or to retreat into the safety of silence and compliance. The weight of those options pressed against his chest, fueling a far deeper contemplation. He had already declared his intent to disrupt the status quo. Now, in the aftermath of his bold statements, he couldn't afford to retreat into the shadows. The moment had arrived for him to fully embrace the man he was striving to become, a catalyst for change. As he took a deep breath, Richard let his instincts guide him. He began composing a response, pouring his thoughts into a clear, assertive message. He wrote about the need for transparency, encouraging other leaders to join him in confronting the uncomfortable truths of their practices. It was a call to arms, cleverly laced with courage and an invitation to engage in critical discourse. Then doubt surfaced again, a faint whisper that questioned his readiness for the storm. Would his peers consider him a threat? He imagined their reactions, the jeers and disbelief that might fill the room when boldness clashed with conventional thinking. Still, he refused to let fear drown out his determination. The world around him bubbled with unrest, and Richard knew the only path forward was one paved with honesty and vulnerability. Before sending the message, he reread the words. They felt like a mirror reflecting the authenticity he longed to exhibit. In other moments, he had withheld what he truly thought, but this time he would not allow that to happen. He was battling more than just industry norms. He was confronting his own ingrained hesitancies, which had kept him from fully stepping into his potential. With a deep inhale, he hit send. A sense of liberation washed over him, lifting the weight from his shoulders. It was a small victory, yet one that propounded the idea that sometimes vulnerability is the true catalyst for growth. For the first time, Richard felt a strong alignment between his values and actions, a pivotal experience that shaped his new identity. As he set his phone down, The tension of anticipation hung thick in the air. Richard could picture the fallout. The undercurrents of opposition stirring, boardroom whispers about insubordination, and the specter of lost relationships looming nearby. Yet, one undeniable truth surged within him: he had taken an irrevocable stride toward embodying his message. Each heartfelt word resonated with his conviction to challenge unethical practices that thrived in silence. His phone dinged almost immediately, jarring him from his thoughts. It was a new message from the journalist, her tone abrupt and pressing. "Can we arrange a time to discuss this further? You've ignited quite the response among industry insiders." Richard's heart raced. This was beyond a simple interview. This was an invitation into the fray, a chance to mold the narrative shaping his industry's future. The door to influence and transformation had creaked open, and he knew he had to step through. Just then, a notification popped up from a mutual acquaintance within his company, someone whose loyalty he once took for granted. "I didn't know you felt that way, Richard. I hope you know where this could lead us." Richard felt a flash of vulnerability again, as uncertainty overtook him momentarily. Was he ready to confront the consequences? Every move would require him to solidify his stance amidst insecurities that had accompanied him too long. He straightened his posture and breathed deeply, gathering his resolve. Scaling this mountain would demand not only his intellectual prowess but emotional stamina as well. What alliances would he form in the chaos? The need to find his allies grew more imperative by the second, loyal supporters who could help him navigate the turbulent tides ahead. Rising from his perch on the railing, Richard decided to take the next step. He began drafting a list of colleagues he could reach out to, strategizing who might stand beside him. But in the back of his mind lingered a chilling thought: what would he do if the most unexpected person turned against him? With the storm brewing stronger than ever, Richard felt an intensity in the air, an undeniable pull toward the unknown. What awaited him beyond the horizon could lead to either ruin or revolution in his career. The moment of confrontation was fast approaching, and Richard could sense he was just on the brink of it all. Would he find allies in this battle for integrity? Or would he discover that the fight came with an even greater price than he anticipated? Richard's fingers hovered over the list on his desk, his breath hitching as he considered the names. Each one represented a distinct potential ally, a teammate who could fortify his resolve and validate his stance. Yet, with each name, the weight of hesitation bore down on him. What if they disagreed? What if support never materialized, and he stood alone, branded a pariah rather than a pioneer? He pushed the list aside, unable to muster the courage to press ahead. Instead, Richard leaned back in his chair, entangled in introspection. What was it that drove him to make such bold declarations? The unrelenting desire for change surged through him, a righteous fire driven by a mixture of ambition and ethics. But beneath that fire lay a nagging fear, a single whisper gnawing at his resolve. What if the cost was more than he bargained for? Images of boardroom meetings flickered through his mind. He could see the faces of his colleagues, those who thrived on routine and the status quo. Their dismissive laughter echoed as he imagined sharing his vision for transparency, and it sent a shiver down his spine. Richard realized that beyond the potential support, he needed clarity for himself. He needed to establish what matters most before he could reach out to others. Gripping the edge of his desk, he drafted a personal manifesto of sorts, laying bare his values and intentions. He explored the instincts prompting him to speak out, identifying his motivations not just as a reaction to industry injustices, but as an embodiment of his career ambitions. Richard was not merely seeking allies. He was declaring a new personal trajectory, one that honored his principles rather than pandering to fear. As he wrote, the connections between his past hesitations and current aspirations became clearer. Each sentence morphed into a mirror reflecting back not only how he viewed himself but how he wanted the world to perceive his integrity. Recalling times he had held back from expressing disagreement, he shuddered. He had survived on compliance, but now he craved to thrive, reveling in the authenticity of his thoughts and connections. His phone chimed again, yanking him from his contemplation. It was a broadcast from industry insiders commenting on his recent declaration. The reactions were mixed, ranging from admiration to outright condemnation. Though he felt the anxiety spiral within himself, a flicker of excitement ignited in his chest. Was this the engagement he had sought? Was this the solar flare of his professional awakening? Motivated by those words, Richard set his phone aside and dove back into the task at hand. He meticulously analyzed which colleagues might resonate with his message, selecting those who had previously displayed curiosity about ethical business practices. Their perspectives differed from the norm voices that, in his mind, might amplify the call for change rather than diminish it. One name stood out: Allison, a fierce advocate for social responsibility within the corporate framework. She had a reputation for being unyielding in her principles, and their occasional discussions sparked a much-needed camaraderie. What would happen if he reached out, not only seeking her backing but inviting her into this broader dialogue? He texted her briefly, inviting her to meet, framing it as an opportunity to share thoughts on ethics in their industry. After hitting send, he felt an unusual medley of fear and thrill coursing through him. This wasn't merely a professional maneuver. It was a personal risk. Yet, something inside him stirred, emboldening him. Time slipped quickly by as he prepared to draft an agenda for their conversation, outlining key points he wanted to cover, particularly the importance of vulnerability as a foundation for impactful leadership. How had his experience shaped that belief? Suddenly, the phone buzzed again. A new notification from the journalist materialized. "Let's connect soon. I hear there are responses brewing from high places." Richard's heart raced, but he could also feel the gravity of responsibility settling upon him. Not only did he have to influence his immediate environment, but now he had potential adversaries preparing to challenge him. In that moment, he recognized the stakes were far greater than a simple exchange of ideas. The showdown he sensed was veering closer not only against the industry but within himself. Would he be able to stand firm in the face of unexpected opposition? As he prepared for the meeting with Allison, Richard understood that the journey ahead demanded a depth of conviction he had yet to fully understand within himself. The confrontation loomed, and with it, the realization that everything could change: his career, his identity, and perhaps even his grasp on integrity itself. How would he navigate this treacherous terrain when the tide began to turn against him? Richard awoke earlier than usual the next day, a mixture of anticipation and dread intertwining in his chest. The time he had to prepare for his meeting with Allison felt both insufficient and overwhelming. He brewed a cup of coffee, the aroma a bittersweet reminder that growth often brewed in discomfort. He sat at the kitchen table, his draft agenda staring back at him like a potential adversary. The points he had outlined: vulnerability, ethical responsibility, and transformational leadership sounded empowering in theory. Yet, reality whispered doubts in his ear. The meeting wasn't just about engaging Allison. It was about stepping into an arena where his voice would be measured against established norms. He considered how often he had folded under pressure, opting for harmony over conviction, afraid of the potential backlash. But now, with a newfound resolve and the fire of ambition advocating for change, clinging to the safety of silence seemed insufferable. As he contemplated the conversation ahead, he noticed his reflection in the window. How many times had he taken the easy path? Today might be different. Today he could advocate for a vision that aligned with his core values. The previous day's whirlwind of notifications jolted his memory. Those mixed reactions to his declaration underscored an important truth. People were watching, waiting to see how this narrative unfolded, and deep down, he sensed the tide of change teetering on the brink. He arrived at the cafe where they had agreed to meet, his heart thumping in his chest. The ambience was vibrant, with conversations buzzing around him, yet he felt isolated in a solemn bubble of his thoughts. Spotting Allison's familiar profile, he waved her over, excitement tinged with apprehension. "Hey, Richard. It's good to see you," she said brightly, taking a seat across from him. "Thanks for meeting me," he replied, attempting to sound composed. The atmosphere shifted subtly. Their typical small talk faltered under the weight of what he truly wanted to discuss. After ordering, they exchanged pleasantries about recent projects before Richard steered the discussion into more controversial waters, expressing his concerns about ethical accountability within their industry. He watched her reaction carefully, searching for indications of agreement or dissent. To his relief, Allison leaned in, her keen interest evident. "You know I share your concerns about transparency and responsibility," she said thoughtfully. "But change is often fueled by risk, and with risk comes pushback." Richard recognized the veiled warning in her words. Pushing boundaries could easily lead to pushback from those who thrived within the existing structure. "I've faced that before," he admitted, his voice gaining strength. "But I believe that we can redefine what success looks like, you and I. Imagine what we could achieve if we worked together." Allison regarded him with a mix of admiration and skepticism. "Defiantly standing up can make you a target. Are you ready for that?" Her question struck him harder than he anticipated. In that moment, he realized what he truly sought wasn't just the validation of partnership, but a more profound understanding of his readiness to face the impending challenges. Would he be able to withstand the pressure, not only from those who oppose change but from within himself? Their conversation deepened, spiraling into discussions about transformative leadership and the courage of vulnerability. But the deeper they delved, the more Richard felt the foundation of his convictions tested. He found himself grappling with doubts. Was he genuinely ready for the turbulence that this transformation might bring? Despite the clarity he sought, doubts clouded his resolve. Each assertion about change evoked shadows of past failures, moments when his voice had quaked, when decisions had faltered. Yet, even as uncertainty coiled around him like a serpent, he felt a flicker of resilience igniting within. By the time the meeting concluded, both Richard and Allison recognized that they stood united in purpose. Yet the burgeoning alliance came with unspoken risks that loomed ahead. As they prepared to leave, Richard received a flurry of messages from his phone. The subject line burst with urgency. "Board meeting called. Prepare for fallout." The unexpected development sent a jolt through him. A confrontation he sensed was looming had just catapulted into the foreground. The stakes had been raised significantly, intersecting with his evolving sense of self and the ethical path he wished to pave. Would he emerge from this crisis wounded or fortified? Richard took a steadying breath, knowing the true test of his newfound resolve was just beginning. How would he confront the impending challenges, and would they expose the vulnerabilities he had only begun to embrace? This time, there was no turning back. Richard stared at his phone, the urgency of the message hammering against his chest like a drumroll heralding an approaching storm. The board meeting called had never seemed so pivotal. It was as if the ground beneath him had shifted, demanding immediate action. He could hear the echoes of his conversation with Allison, the doubts, and the resolve. Perhaps this was the moment to put everything he had discussed into practice. Arriving at the office, he noted the stark contrast between the vibrant cafe and the sterile conference room he was now entering. The ambience warped into a tight knot of anxiety, amplified by the sight of his colleagues shuffling papers and exchanging tense glances. He took his seat at the long mahogany table, the surface polished to a sheen that mirrored his own growing apprehension. As the meeting commenced, the atmosphere was laden with anticipation. Richard flicked through the agenda, each item more daunting than the last. Discussions of profitability, metrics, and projected growth splattered across their screens seemed distant and irrelevant, compared to the undercurrents swirling within him. Issues of ethical accountability were the real concerns gnawing at his insides. "Today we face critical decisions," the CEO's voice boomed, dragging him back to the present. "On the table is a proposal for a new partnership. If approved, it could reshape our standing in the market." Ripples of excitement and apprehension cycled through the room. Richard clenched his fists, reflecting on the cost of such a partnership and the values it might compromise. The board members flitted through discussions, their eyes fixed on the glimmering potential. But within the depths of his mind, doubts echoed louder. Could he step forward and voice his concerns without being branded an outlier? His heartbeat synchronized with the mounting chatter around him. Words were exchanged about profit margins and strategic advantages, each one languaging a type of triumph that felt hollow against the ethical structure he felt bound to uphold. Richard took a deep breath, the air tasting of metal and resolve, urging him to move. "May I add something?" he blurted, his voice surprisingly steady. The hastily quieted room turned to him, surprised by the interruption. All eyes widened in expectancy, and he felt the weight of their scrutiny. A test of vulnerability he hadn't fully anticipated. The silence stretched taut as he shifted in his seat, grappling with the gravity of his thoughts. While these projections are indeed impressive, I believe we must also weigh the ethical implications of this partnership. Are we choosing profit over principles? What message do we send if our primary concern is merely market share? A murmur erupted, akin to a ripple of unease that spread across the table. Some nodded in agreement, others frowned, perplexed. Richard felt the corners of his resolve solidify as he pressed on. It's vital that we redefine our success. We risk losing the core values that brought us here if we pursue this deal blindly. The CO's expression darkened, the excitement in the room fading into indignation. Richard, our responsibility is to the stakeholders. They don't share our internal ethical debates. The dismissal hung heavy, laced with threat. Yet, it only stoked the fire within him. I understand that, but I refuse to believe stakeholder satisfaction should come at the expense of our integrity. We should be setting a standard, not lowering the bar, he countered, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. A conversation ignited, oscillating between support and opposition. He watched as the board members chimed in, weighing their loyalties to principles against the allure of quick wealth. Richard recognized his power. The very doubts that had once tethered him were now the fuel for his argument. As the meeting reached a climax, conflicting opinions floated through the air like smoke. It was clear he had invoked discomfort, a discomfort he knew would lead to conflict. The demeanor of the CEO shifted, and it dawned on Richard that he had crossed a line. But it wasn't just about him, was it? What he was navigating wasn't merely a debate on profit. It was a fork in the road that demanded a reckoning. Would he lead towards a path of ethical integrity or back into the shadows of complacency? Just as the descent began to crystallize, a new message flashed on his phone, a crisis alert from the industry, something that could potentially jeopardize the proposed deal, a scandal that could force their hand into discussing ethics more openly than ever before. The ripple effect of his actions now lay before him, a crossroad of monumental proportions. How far was he willing to push? It was no longer just a matter of personal growth. It was a potential turning point for the entire organization. With adrenaline coursing through him and the echoes of dissent still resounding in his chest, Richard prepared to confront the unfolding chaos ahead. What lay on the other side of this decision? And would he be able to harness the momentum he had built, or would it spiral beyond his control? Richard stood at the precipice of evolution. The boardroom had transformed from a classic arena for corporate business into a battleground for ideals where every whispered debate held the weight of history. He had stepped beyond merely expressing his concerns. He was catalyzing a shift, a battle for integrity that had roots deeper than any dollar amount. Each word he had spoken resonated, an echo of the many conversations he had had with Allison, his mentor, and within himself. With the specter of dissent swirling, he committed to this moment, a profound recognition that emerged not just from courage, but from the transparent authenticity he had begun to embrace. Richard, the CEO's voice disrupted the tension, eyes narrowing at him. You realize this will have consequences? You risk alienating yourself and this entire board. A calm settled within him as he replied, that risk is worth taking if it means we uphold the values that brought us together in the first place. A hushed silence fell, eyes darting from him to the CEO, weighing their own loyalties, having spent years debating which road to take, financial gain or ethical commitment. He refused to be swept back into complacency. His arguments flew like fireballs into the negotiations, igniting a new conversation about the company's future more aligned with justice than profit. Yet, just as the tide shifted, his phone flashed again, a crisis alert whispered gloom into the previously tense dialogue. A scandal emerged within another company in their industry, decrying unethical practices and driving competitors to scramble for ethical stances. The very fabric of corporate America felt shaken by a clarion call for responsibility. Richard recognized this as a rare opportunity to shift the focus from just focusing on profits to a movement towards an ethical renaissance. Falling back into his confidence, he proposed a bold idea. What if we take this opportunity to lead become the standard others are chasing, and not the ones merely reacting to market demands? We can either succumb to the want of profit or step into our role as pioneers. His words ignited conversations. What are we standing for? How do we want to be remembered? A fiery discussion blossomed, people shedding their reservations, seeking a path beyond quick riches. Richard had ignited a passionate discourse within the very boardroom that once suffocated him. After hours of spirited debate, the energy in the room transformed, collapsing the cynicism that once defined it. The board voted. In a striking reversal, the focus shifted from profit-driven partnerships to community-minded initiatives, an entirely new direction that accounted for transparency, ethical sourcing, and social responsibility. Richard emerged not only as an individual but as a leader, recognized for his forthrightness and courage to challenge the status quo. Walking out of the boardroom, he felt validated not just by the decision but by his own transformation. The weight that had tethered him for so long now lifted. He had discovered his voice. The change echoed beyond the boardroom. An article featuring Richard blossomed into a narrative nationwide. He was hailed for his integrity, positioning himself as a leader advocating for newfound ethics, urging others to rethink how ambition manifested in their choices. Richard not only proved to everyone around him that integrity could coexist with success, but he had also achieved something even more profound. A true belief in himself. The ambivalence that once clouded his intentions vanished. Clarity thickened the air around him like an invigorating breath. His mother's teachings rung loudly, resonating with every step he took. He had conquered more than a boardroom. He had rendered his past a celebration of his journey thus far. With newfound confidence, Richard now stood tall, bridging his vision with professional aspirations, channeling his energy into planned community initiatives that focused on uplifting others, his true calling. Ultimately, Richard not only achieved recognition within his industry but transformed himself into a beacon of progress for those who sought to define success not by wealth but by moral virtue. This was his moment, one that transcended mere ambition, crystallizing his growth into an enduring legacy. Every challenge conquered and every fear faced revitalized his commitment to change the world around him. Now, it is your turn to step into your moment of transformation. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional tales. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm you need to support powerful narratives like Richard's. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Your voice matters. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to witness this incredible journey of personal overcoming and ethical responsibility. Together, let's amplify voices prepared to redefine success.